Welcome everyone to today's live talk, a dialogue in a series of live discussions brought to you by Bayer. My name is Carlota Gómez de la Hoz and I'm Head of International and Regional Communications at Bayer, and I'm very happy to be your moderator today. I hope that you and your families are safe and doing well in these really challenging times. So thanks again for taking part in a discussion on a very important topic, a very sensitive topic, which is how to protect our forest and discuss solutions to stop deforestation, definitely, which is a global problem worldwide. Let me kick off the session with a quote from former US President Franklin Roosevelt that once said, "A nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. Forests are the lungs of our land, purifying the air and giving fresh strength to our people." While this is definitely truly the case, there is of course even more. Forests play a vital role in mitigating climate change, fostering biodiversity, and enabling water and soil conservation. Millions of people rely on forests for food security, livelihoods, and energy sources. Yet, at the same time, we are destroying from 15 to 18 million hectares of forest, an area of approximately the size of Belgium per year, which is 2,400 trees cut down each minute. So which means that in the time that this talk is going to take place, more than 140,000 trees will be cut. So a little bit of food for thought. While forests still cover 30% of the world land area, they are disappearing at an alarming rate. Looking at only at the period between 1919 and 2016, the world lost 502,000 square miles, 1.3 million square kilometers of forest, an area larger than South Africa. The reasons for this worrying trend are many-fold. The need to provide food, feed, energy, timber, and housing for a global population steadily growing in numbers and wealth. To this end, we have invited today André Guimaraes and Matthias Berninger, two excellent experts who will help us understand these underlying drivers of deforestation, the resulting effects of our planet, and most importantly, what can we do to solve it. So I really like to have a very constructive discussion, very solution-oriented discussion, and I'm very happy to have them both on this discussion. So let me quickly introduce André Guimaraes. Since 2015, André is the Executive Director of the Amazon Environmental Research Institute, a Brazilian think tank focused on the Amazonian challenges for reaching zero deforestation and sustainable development. He's also a facilitator of the Brazilian Coalition of Climate, Forest and Agriculture, a network of over 200 entities focusing on the development of a long-term vision for the land of use in Brazil. He has spent almost his whole life on protecting the Amazon, and I hope that also you, André, can give us a little bit more of information about this in the talk. And you started your career as a research at the Amazon Institute of Mankind and Environment. You served at the World Bank as a project manager of the Rainforest pilot program, and you work on different NGOs. Today, you are joining us from Brasilia. Welcome, André.
Thank you, Carlota. It's an honor to be here. A deep appreciation. Thank you.
Thanks, André. And we also have Matthias Berninger. Since 2019, Matthias has been Senior Vice President for Global Public and Government Affairs and Sustainability for Bayer. He is the architect of the company's significantly enhanced global sustainability platform, launched last year with a strong leadership commitment. The aim of this strategy is to signal a corporate ambition, helping more people thrive within the planetary boundaries. Today, Matthias, you are joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Carlota. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And just a quick reminder before we start the discussion today, I cordially invite you all participants on the chat to participate lively in our discussion. So please make use of the comment function for this purpose. I will see your comments and I will incorporate them, your questions and comments accordingly. So with that, let's get started. And I would also like to start clarifying also, some aspects also from the participants. So my first question to Andre, and already gave a hint at the beginning, you have spent almost your whole life in protecting the Amazon. What triggered you to dedicate your life to it?
Excellent question, Carola. Thank you very much. And but let me just begin here thanking and congratulating Bayer for this opportunity. I think this is the moment in this planet in which dialogues and conversations are probably the fundamental piece to drive us to a sustainable future. So my deepest appreciation to this initiative, and thank you very much for the question. So let me roll back the movie 30 years ago, or nearly 30 years ago. I've graduated, Carola, here in Brasilia in agronomy, and I'm an agronomist by training. And I received my diploma back in 1991, 1 year before the event of the Rio 92, the major global event that shaped the debates about climate change, the debates about biodiversity, desertification. So all that discussion took place in Rio de Janeiro, in my backyard, back 28 years ago, a few months after I've graduated. So in one word, what really moved me to, actually I moved from Brasilia. Brasilia is a couple of thousand of kilometers away from Belém, which is the city in the Amazon where I lived my first years, the very first years of my career. So what motivated me was in one word, curiosity. At that time, we knew, if today we know little about the Amazon, can you imagine nearly 30 years ago? There was very little information about the Amazon, a lot of curiosity, many questions. So that was the moment in which probably Brazilians realized that we have a treasure. We have a treasure in the northern part of the country. And myself as a young student or a young graduated from the University of Brasilia, decided to help my country to understand the process, to understand the Amazon, to understand the challenges of the Amazon, to understand the interactions and the consequences of interactions of humans and the forest. And well, I fell in love, and here I am, almost 30 years later, still doing what I've begun my career with. So it's a little bit of curiosity and a lot of love.
Great to hear that, Andre, and thanks again for joining us today. Matthias, when you serve as a parliamentary state secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Consumer Protection, you were responsible for forestry and involved in a huge debate on dying forests at that time, the so-called Waldsterben. What is your personal connection to this topic?
Well, my grandparents were farmers, and that also included owning forestry. So I remember very early on walking through a forest and then learning that that's somehow our family's forest. Yeah, and I always loved them, and that of course was a huge connection to just kind of think about that somehow this is a part of something that in generations was also in the hands of my family. So I always had a passion for it. And I would say that in the early 2000s, when I was in government, there was a lot of momentum in driving forest protection. So we've seen both certification schemes moving forward. We have seen environmental minded NGOs working together with business on driving schemes for sustainable forest management. And during those days, I was really happy to be in charge of that topic. But there also were problems. Given how the drought today puts pressure on forests around the world, including in Germany, I have to say, even though we had problems back then, they are much bigger 10 years later or 15 years later.
And actually, it is already giving a message, right? I mean, it's very, very interesting to see that you keep both of you, your passion, since you decided to start your career, but also it should make us think, right, why this is, a problem, and potentially, as you said, like a growing a problem. So,
Carlotta, once a tree hugger, always a tree hugger.
I agree.
Good, good, good. So just let me also welcome participants from all over the world. We have people from Morocco, Pakistan, USA, Turkey, Egypt, Netherlands, Argentina, Ghana, Brazil, Indonesia, just to only name very few. So I think it is also fair to start by clarifying some concepts. And I am looking at you now, Andre. Today, of course, we are going to talk about global deforestation. Could you also explain the audience what deforestation is and how it differs from sustainable forestry?
In simple terms, Carola, deforestation is the problem, and sustainable management of forests is part of the solution. Why is deforestation a problem? It's a problem today because the model of development that we have assumes that we need permanently more area to perform our activities. I'm not only talking about agriculture here, I'm talking about cities growing, infrastructure growing all over the place. So the model of development or the paradigm that brought us here until today is what I like to call the paradigm of expansionism. So we've been growing. Back, if we roll the movie back 250,000 years ago, the humans, our species, the Homo sapiens sapiens, we were a group of 10,000 people living in one area in sub-Saharan Africa. That was it. Today, 250,000 years later, here we are, a community of 7 billion people that are living all over in every single square meter of this planet. So we are very competent. Although there was a loss in the process of us reaching where we are today, which is nature. Nature, at some extent, paid the bill. So we've expanded and expanded and expanded, and now we are facing the results of this process. So climate change, pollution of oceans, pollutions of rivers, pollution of the atmosphere, cities polluted, poverty, all of those issues, those challenges that we are facing today are at some extent a consequence of this development process of this paradigm that we have, that has brought us here today. The challenge now is to change this paradigm. So deforestation can't take place anymore. Instead, we need to remunerate standing forests. We need to transform forests into assets, not into cost lines in our budgets. So we don't need, hopefully, we will not need in the future to remove forests to thrive. Instead, we should protect forests to thrive, so that forests can continue throwing water into our agriculture. Forests can continue storing the biodiversity that we'll need for our medicines and our food in the future. So there's a new challenge now, Carola, which is we have to reshape the paradigm that brought us here. And to reshape that paradigm, deforestation has to be in our past. Instead, we have to replace deforestation, as I said, for forest standing, forests that continue to provide the services that people need for their lives. Water, biodiversity, carbon storage, and so many other services that forests provides. And in order to maintain forests, we have to create value for forest standing. Sustainable management, which is basically you manage those forests, keep those forests standing, but extract from those forests the wealth, timber, fibers, products from the forest. But the assumption of the sustainable management is to keep the forest standing. So this is a new way to look at this paradigm that brought us here and to revise that paradigm based on standing forests. That's the challenge of us and of the future generations.
Good. You mentioned paradigm, of course, a paradigm for the worldwide population. Matthias, as you mentioned at the beginning, you work for the German government and you were very concerned about deforestation. Despite you were focused in the past in Germany, of course, we are talking about global problem, right?
We are talking about a global problem. Before I joined Bayer, I worked for a consumer goods company that, like almost all consumer goods company, was relying on palm oil. And sustainable palm oil production is one of those topics people were working on, because we saw huge deforestation in Asia as a result of the demand for this raw material of palm oil, which is almost everywhere. Africa is one of those continents that gets often forgotten. Today, as we speak, the habitats of rainforests, with all the value for biodiversity, for protecting the climate, for producing the water that leads to rain are chopped down and transformed into charcoal, because poverty-driven, it's the only way for the growing populations in Africa to have like the necessary energy source for cooking. So this is a global problem. And that's why I believe the solution cannot be finger pointing from one part of the world to another, but we need a new revitalized global forest protection movement that is literally carried by all governments and not just some.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the effects of deforestation. Andre, you have been observing deforestation in the Amazon for many years, and that's why also you are still working now. In your very personal view, could you describe how the rainforest and the environment has changed over time?
We are losing tropical forests, Carol, in a speed that we shouldn't be losing this time. This goes for the Amazon, this goes for sub-Saharan Africa, this goes for Asia. So we are losing tropical forests globally at a speed that is going to harm us. It's actually is harming us already. Let me just exemplify with the case of the Amazon, which I know better, but I believe that this can, the same analysis goes for other tropical parts of the world. We have faced three very defined periods when it comes to deforestation in the Amazon. The first period was the first decade, or actually the last decade of last century, the 90s. We have faced peaks of deforestation. Deforestation in the Amazon was climbing, was reaching dramatic levels. We have had in the year 1997, 1998, a peak of close to 27,000 square kilometers of of Amazon forest that deforested in 1 year. So there was the peak of deforestation that decade. Then everybody got concerned, people got aware of what was going on. And the following decade, the first 10 years of the 2000s, were the years in which we were able here in Brazil, in the Amazon, to reduce the deforestation by 80%. So the peak of 27,000 square kilometers went down to nearly between 4 and 5,000 square kilometers in 1 year. So we've reduced by 80% the deforestation in that decade. Unfortunately, and that's the third period, which began in the 2011, 2012, and it's still going until now, is a period in which we have relaxed the command and control activities, have reduced the investments in combating deforestation. And what we have observed over the past 8 to 10 years is a little by little increase in deforestation. So if we were at the level of 4,000 to 5,000 square kilometers back in 2013, 2012, we are now going back to 12,000 square kilometers, most likely this year. So what's happening is that, we need to continue to keep people informed of what's going on. We need to continue putting pressure on governments, on companies, on farmers and ranchers, so that we can go back to that moment. What is interesting also to mention, Carol, is that during that time that we have reduced the deforestation by 80%, the production of grains and beef in Brazil has doubled. So this correlation of, we need, or this concept that we need more areas in order to increase our production and our GDP is completely outdated. Technology, and here's Bayer to prove what I'm saying. Technology is here to do that, to help us, to better use the areas that we have already cleared, to intensify the production. We can do that. We have done that in the past. Why don't we do that again? We need to join forces, Carola. There's no way, there's not a single solution. There's no silver bullet. People, companies, families, governments, we need to sit around the same table and face the challenge. This is a challenge that affects all of us. Deforestation of tropical forests is a bad business for every single inhabitant of this planet. We have to stop it.
Matthias, maybe you want to take this up? I mean, what Bayer can do to improve the situation?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Bayer is committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. And when we made that commitment, we realized this will only be meaningful if our value chain is also built on the premise of net zero deforestation. There is no point in trying to make carbon commitments on the one hand and have a value chain that doesn't fall in place with that. I'm an optimist that it's possible for the reasons that Andre just mentioned. I think there have been huge improvement in yield in general in agriculture in the last 50 years. That's why the world population could double without the arable land growing at the same speed. But we need to make even more strides to stop land use change, and we need to produce more on existing land. That will only work if we do that in ways that respects biodiversity, in ways that makes agriculture more resilient against climate change. And the background picture I chose for today is just one example how that will work. So it's a cornfield in the United States after one of those storms that is currently bothering the Midwest of the United States. And what you see on one side is corn standing and growing, and on the other side, it just kind of broke into pieces, and of course the yield is lost. The innovation here is a short corn with a deeper root system, and as a result of that, we can produce more on existing land, we avoid crop losses, and if we are brave enough and add to it, for example, technology like BT, we can also make that corn more resilient against insects. The amount of innovations that are in the pipeline of Bayer, but also many other companies, to produce more on existing land with a much more sustainable approach is just amazing. And that's why I'm an optimist. I believe we will be able to decouple agricultural production from the problem of forest deforestation. And then there is one other thing we need to do. We need to reward farmers for protecting forests. Brazil has one of the best, I believe, actually, having looked at a lot of forest protection laws, probably the best forest protection law in the world. It was inspired by Rio in 1992. And farmers in Brazil today are forced to keep forest protectors, that they don't get any money transfers for it, but there's a huge amount of forest that is still standing that they theoretically could chop down. Can we reward farmers for not doing that? By providing access to breakthrough technologies, but also allowing them to make money by insetting carbon. That is a business model we are currently working on at Bayer.
Yep. Following on that one, I'm looking now at Andre. You also mentioned something in that direction to remunerate, right? To make forest or to make forest out of let's say, or to make them assets, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you referring to when you are saying that?
Okay, 1 hectare of the Amazon forest. And I'm sure that that's similar to 1 hectare of sub-Saharan forest and 1 hectare of Asian tropical forest. It stores somewhere between 80 to 150 tons of carbon, 1 hectare, 100 meters by 100 meters. That's a lot of carbon. Right? Can you imagine if you do the math there and multiply it by the thousands and thousands of hectares that we are losing every day? So in the case of Brazil, for example, 3/4 of the Brazilian carbon emissions are directly related to land use. And 2/3 of these 3/4 is deforestation. So deforestation is and remember that Brazil is number 6 in global emissions. So the number 6 country in global emissions, more than half of its emissions is related to deforestation. So deforestation is once again something that has to stop urgently. And in order to do that, we have to perceive value of forest standing. So carbon, as I said, is an example. We don't want that carbon in the atmosphere at all. Scientists would say that without the Amazon and the tropical forests integrity maintained, we are not going to reach the targets of the Paris Agreement by the end of the century. It's simple as that. So we need to keep the forest standing. One way that we are exercising that here in Brazil, Carola, is through direct payment for farmers. Of course, there is the most of the deforestation in the Amazon, and I believe that goes for other countries too, is illegal. It's simply illegal. They can't do it. It's in public areas. We have observed in the Amazon about 10 to 11% of the deforestation in the Amazon takes place inside indigenous territories and protected areas. In other words, it's taking place where it should not take place at all. It's completely illegal. So we have to deal with the illegal deforestation. But as Matthias mentioned, there is still a huge area, and as you mentioned too, Carol, there's still a huge area that can be legally deforested in Brazil, in Uganda, in Africa, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and so on and so forth. So what can we do to prevent that deforestation? Somehow remunerate those farmers, those landowners, for the services that they are providing for everybody. The services of storing carbon, the services of recycling water, the services of protecting biodiversity. We need to understand that these are services. We all benefit from those services. So we need to remunerate those services that someone is providing to us so that this someone can keep those services flowing. So this is a new way to see nature. In other words, we need to incorporate forest standing not just as a cost line in our budget, but also as an asset in our budgets. We are exercising that here in Mato Grosso state in Brazil. We are already at IPAM. We are paying farmers not to exercise their right to deforest. And here between us, there is a big line of farmers willing to participate in the program, which is a good sign. People see that there is a value in forest standing, but if I don't see that value transformed into an income, I'm always be tempted to go into the forest and clear more areas to raise cattle, to plant soybeans, and so on and so forth. We need to create the right incentives, expand them to public policies, and resolve the equation.
Okay, good. Maybe I can pick a question or maybe also a comment from the audience, very much in that direction. So sustainable forest management is one tool, as we have recommended, to reduce deforestation and also a way to create value and assets. But what is your opinion, Andrea, about conservation of natural forests? What type of value could conservation bring, especially in Latin America context where indigenous communities are involved?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm going to give the Amazon example, but that goes for tropical forests as a whole. 1/3 of the Amazon forest today, of the Brazilian Amazon forest, are indigenous territories. So this group of people, right, about 500, 600,000 Brazilians, indigenous Brazilians, they are protecting an area that supplies water to the central savannas agriculture of Brazil, that supplies food to 1.2 billion people every day. So that is the direct importance of these indigenous territories, and those indigenous people protecting that asset, which is irrigating for free the food that more than a billion people is going to eat tomorrow. So, but if we revert the process, the question is, are these indigenous groups being considered in the process? Are these indigenous groups being respected by the services that they are providing to billions of people in the world? Are these indigenous people receiving the conditions so that they can maintain their cultures and their life, their way of life, so that they can continue protecting that assets for us all human beings? I mean, this equation is not resolved. On the contrary, we are still facing, indigenous groups being kicked out of their lands. We are facing violence in indigenous areas, not just in Brazil, but abroad. So we, white people from the cities, we have to understand that the protection that is being performed by indigenous groups in the tropical forest globally are benefiting us at home in São Paulo, in New York, in Berlin. We have to value these people. We have to somehow bring them into the economic equation of our future development, and not segregate those communities from. They are important. They are fundamental. I just want to finalize with a little story that happened to me about 10 years ago. I met Cacique Raoni, which is probably one of the most important indigenous leaders in the world today. And Raoni lives in an indigenous territory about the size of Portugal, and they are about 45, 50,000 indigenous people. So I've approached Raoni with a lot of courage, and I asked this big Indian guy, look, Raoni, isn't it too much land for too few indigenous people? And he thought, and he replied to me, Andrea, there's another way to see it. It's a few Indians taking care of a lot of land for a lot of Brazilians. I think that summarizes the importance of these areas and these groups protecting them.
Okay, maybe also I want to highlight a comment also on the chat. This time is about Indonesia, as we are talking about a global problem. If we look back at the root of deforestation, it started and still continue by most of the developed countries, the big manufacturer led by developed country that causing huge exploitation in developing countries. So I think that what needs to be done is developing the local citizen to take control of their forest. In Indonesia, most of the traditional tribes across the nation have traditional laws to protect the forest, and it's helping to preserve the forest from exploitation. We have currently 4,000 viewers, 4,000 participants, and I would like also to refer to a poll that we did, and it's really the results are hot from the press. We raised one question and nearly 1,000 people answered. So the question is, do you think that the destruction of the forest can still be stopped? And let's see how faithful people is. So 42% answer yes, definitely, it can still be stopped. Only 7% said no, I think it's too late, climate change, fires, etc. And 51% said, which is unclear, unclear, and not only if we do it together. So 51%. So, what is your opinion about these results?
Carlotta, from my end, for the longest time, the biggest problem in the climate change debate were climate change deniers. So people that try to sort out into the overwhelming body of science that man-made climate change is actually happening and wreaking havoc. The big group that concerns me today are what I would call the climate change fatalists. People saying, yeah, it's a problem, but we can't do anything about it anymore. It's just how life is going to be. And the reason why I think that is so is what you can see in countries like Japan or Germany. They faced at one point of their history also the trend of full deforestation, because that's where human development went to. But both Japan and Germany introduced forest protection laws early on, long before industrialization started, that protected huge amount of lands. And when you today look at those two countries, you can see quite a lot of forests as a result of this decision. So I believe it's in our hands to protect forests. Now, where should that happen? I believe G20 is the right place for it. One of the things I really hated was to see G7 telling the rest of the world what they have to do in terms of forest protection, when in fact those countries indeed were a key part of causing the problem. Indonesia, Brazil, China, India weren't part of the G7 meeting, even though they are today huge economic powers. In G20, they all sit around the table. So I feel we need to move into a very different place, and we need to discuss the global forest protection agenda with the most important economies around the world. And today, of course, the demand doesn't only come from the formerly largest economies, it also comes from the emerging economies, be it China, be it India, be it the industrial development, also in countries like Brazil. So G20 for me is the place where we can find a solution if the governments of the world want to. What drives my optimism? Just in the last 4 weeks, Europe announced a 2050 target for decarbonization. China said we want to do the same, but by 2060. And Japan just last week said, well, we want to do 2050 as well. There is a real push to a global decarbonization agenda, and we have to make sure that forest protection is a key topic discussed in that context.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're talking about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andre.
No, I just wanted to add to what Matthias said, that hopefully soon we will have another big country from the northern part of the globe also engaged and committed to mitigating climate change and to mitigate deforestation and so on. So let's see what happens in a few days.
Okay, you're talking about politics, but also what about industry? Andre, what do you expect from companies like Bayer in order to mitigate this issue?
I like to tell stories, Carol. Let me tell you a quick story that happened with me back when I was a trainee at Embrapa. Embrapa is a research, agricultural research institution here in Brazil, very, very renowned and so on. So I was a trainee at Embrapa, and I was part of a team that was working with management, with improvement of some seeds for the Cerrado. We were working with peas, we were working with sweet corn and so on. And we were applying technology to try to improve the quality of those seeds and adapt them to Cerrado conditions. So we were studying yields. We were selecting, actually, for yields, we were selecting for resistance to insects, resistance to plagues, and so on and so forth. So those are the variables that we were applying to our research. I think that the challenge for technological companies such as Bayer today, Carol, is to continue doing that. So we need more production per hectare, per square meter. We need more resistance to diseases so that we can use less chemicals and so on. But we need to incorporate new variables, especially the variables related to climate change. So the science or the technology that is being developed today is going to be available, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years from now. So we have to anticipate what's going to happen in the future, and no one better than high-tech companies such as Bayer to do that, because climate change will impose restrictions to agriculture that we're not facing today. We're actually observing that when it comes back to looking at Mato Grosso state. Mato Grosso state here in Brazil is the single largest producer of soybean and corn and beef in Brazil. It's probably one of the subnational units that produces the most in the world. And Mato Grosso Mato Grosso has a fantastic comparative advantage, which is it can have double crops in 1 year. Some places they have 3 crops because it rains so much and it's so well distributed, the rain, that they can plant the soy, harvest it, and plant the corn and harvest it, and sometimes even plant corn again. So and that's because of the rain distribution. And the rain distribution is directly correlated to global climate change and to local deforestation. This science has proven already. We have been observing that Mato Grosso is losing 1 week of the rain season every decade now, and it's speeding up. So in 5 to 10 years, Mato Grosso is not going to be able to do double cropping anymore. So part of the income of the farmer is going to be gone. Part of the GDP of the country is going to be gone. And part of the good prices of food globally are probably going to be gone because of that. So, the technology of the future, Carole, has to incorporate climate change scenarios for agriculture. And that's a call I do to Bayer. Please do incorporate in your technology development decision-making processes, climate change.
If I can build on that, Andre, one of the really cool things happening at the moment is the biorevolution. So genomics, biology meet the possibilities of information technology and artificial intelligence. 8 out of the last 10 Nobel Prizes in chemistry, 8 out of the last 10 were awarded to breakthrough findings that fuel the biorevolution. Those of us who care a lot about electrical cars, only 1 was awarded to progress in battery technology. And this biorevolution, in my book, is one of the key revolutions that will allow us to produce more on less land in a much more sustainable way. It will also transform the pharmaceutical industries. That's why Bayer is both in the pharmaceutical space as well as in the agricultural space, because the underlying technology breakthroughs are applicable in both categories. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? We can introduce family planning for insects. So if you think about the fall armyworm, which is one of the big challenges for growing corn in the Mato Grosso and generally in tropical agriculture, we can reduce the pressure on plants by reducing the populations of fall armyworms with much less chemistry needed, and a combination of strengthening plants through Bt genes and directly dealing with insects. Bayer has partnered with Oxitec to do exactly that, and we started in Brazil. So one of our commitments to stop deforestation and to help Brazilian agriculture is that we bring the breakthrough innovation, the latest technology into Brazil, and in some areas actually start those revolutions exactly in the region that you described.
What would you say, Andres, your point of view as a representative from an NGO on these technologies?
Sorry, Carol, I didn't get the question. Come again, please.
Yes, what is your point of view as a representative of an NGO on the use of these technologies that Mattia referred?
Well, technologies that could combine increasing production per area, more sustainability, and respect to rights of people, I think they all should be supported. So in my view, the population is growing. The potential of some tropical countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and African countries to supply food to the world is fundamental to a growing population. But we cannot do that at the expense of our tropical forests, for the reasons that we were talking about, water cycles, biodiversity, maintenance, and so on. So, and the way to do that, how can we continue to increase the production of food, improve the quality of the production of food with reduction of deforestation at the same time? Technology is the answer, or is 80-90% of the answer. So there's no way we are going to deal with feeding billions and billions of people with less area if we don't invest in technology. Now, it's not any technology. So technology for the future do have to respect sustainability issues, civil rights respect, traditional communities respect the rights, and so on. So if we do perform the technology of the future, that's what should be the technology of the future, benefiting people, not just people that are going to eat the outcome of the agriculture, but people that are involved in the process of production will be respected. If the environment is respected, and if the world's climate is maintained, that's the good technology, and we should all support it.
Okay, let's it's time maybe now to take a question from the audience. There's one question asking about are carbon tax and cap and trade programs effective?
I think they are. The question is whether those are driven only by governments or also include the commitments of businesses. So there are around 1,000 companies that have joined up to the Science Based Target Initiative, and quite a few from them also supports the UN ambition for business to decarbonize. And I believe that those companies, like for example Bayer, also need to look at the emissions that they can't prevent and invest in projects that actually take the carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's not only about government activity, it's also about private business activities that we need to drive. There are breakthrough innovations. We already see that satellites today, both with infrared and optical methods, give us very precise data on deforestation. There are two very important sensors, but there are more that would allow us to measure the amount of carbon stored in the soil. And as we get better in measuring that, we will also be able to reward farmers for doing exactly that, for not only growing food, but also increasing topsoil and removing carbon from the atmosphere. Carlotta, for me in general, what needs to happen is we need to reduce carbon emissions. That's number one. We need to have less artificial fertilizers. We need to make sure that we are more efficient in how we produce. We then need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And we need to invest in resilience. Now going back to forests, the beauty is of the forests we just talk about today, they do all three things. I'm always amazed. I mean, if there was anything that already does what the world needs to do at global scale, it's exactly that natural forests. They of course, as long as they are protected, avoid additional carbon emissions. They remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. And Andre made the very important point. Rainforests are called rainforests for a reason, because they ensure irrigation. They enable farmers to actually grow successfully, because the most important ingredient for every farmer in the world is water. And there are great examples where that worked. I just saw one in Nigeria, where you had, as part of the green wall in Africa, where you had projects that invested in forestation, and suddenly farmers had higher yield because the groundwater level came closer to what they needed. And this is, for me, the most important point. If you are an agri-business, you need to be in the business of forest protection. Otherwise, you don't have a long-term business.
You both mentioned reduction. Are we in a crossroad? Do we really need to choose between, and I'm taking now a question from the audience, do we need to choose between industrialization or nature? What would you both say about this statement?
I have a take on this. Not at all. I think we need both. But we need both under a different paradigm. Both the industry, energy generation, agriculture, these are all activities that have been performed until now on an expansion process. So we need more areas, big dams, big highways, big everything, big ships, big everything, big cities. We need to redesign this rationale. Do we really need big everything? Do we really need everything that we are consuming from the planet today? What is it that we want for the future generation? Well, actually, what is it that the millennium kids want? Are we asking that question? I have a millennium here, and they have a completely different rationale. Their decision-making process is completely different. The thing I wanted the most when I was 17, 18 years old was a car. I have an 18-year-old daughter that she has no intention to have a car. She wants to use Uber and other means of transport. So this is a revolution. It's a science revolution that is taking place. And I think we need to observe these signals so that companies, countries, families, and so on reshape the way that they interact with nature. And at the end of the day, what we all want is less demand for natural resources and a better harmonization between humans and nature. This is the beauty of I see for the future. And not what I've been observing in the Amazon and in the Cerrado and in sub-Saharan Africa, which is basically destruction as a consequence generating poverty. That equation has to be completely changed.
I would also like to bring you both back at the current moment. We are under an important pandemic. How is this pandemic potentially going to affect deforestation?
I like you want to go, Matthias?
Go ahead, Andre.
No, very quickly. I like a sentence from a colleague of mine, Carol, that says the following: land grabbers are not in quarantine. So it's simple as that, right? I am in quarantine for 7 months. A substantial portion of the monitoring and the command and control agencies of the government and the local governments are concentrated in the pandemic, and that's natural. I mean, people are dying in the cities and they need support. So all the state agencies are concentrated there, and the land grabbers, the illegal loggers, the illegal gold miners, they know that. So they are sort of feeling themselves free to go. And so that's a direct consequence of the pandemic. But on the other hand, I think the pandemic has made us think more long term, think more about the consequences of our acts today to the future generations. So if I walk out in the streets without a mask, I may be killing people. I may be responsible for hurting people. And that's something that may teach us lessons. That that the same goes for deforestation. If I walk out in the street and I be killing someone because I can contaminate someone, if I don't observe what's happening in the Amazon, in Africa, and Indonesia, I'm going to be irresponsible with my kids. So it's the same rationale. I think there's a sociological aspect of this pandemic which needs to be understood, studied, and informed to the future generations so that they can behave differently from ours.
There's one comment.
I would build on that, Andre. For me, there are not many good news in this pandemic, to be honest. To see how slowly the world is able to marshal resources and react as one world to beat this virus sucks for everybody who listens today, and of course, mostly for those who got infected by this virus. However, if there would have been one thing to kind of take the energy out of the global climate debate, it would have been this virus. And the opposite has happened. That just shows that the dynamic behind a broad global movement to decarbonization will not be stopped. Yeah, either you're on the bus or you're not on the bus, but the bus is going. And for me, a good example is in the United States, where there is a political debate whether climate change is really a problem. But despite a government supporting traditional fossil fuels, renewable energies are now a bigger source of energy than coal. And that is for the first time since 1885. This is going to happen. And the question is not whether it happens. The question is whether countries are proactive and business is proactive to not only contribute to decarbonization, but also create opportunities for extracting new ideas, new businesses, and value from solving some of the biggest global problems. The other thing I want to say is the pandemic has led to a massive increase in food insecurity. And we should never forget that one of the reasons why we are able to provide food for almost 8 billion people is that innovation in agriculture has enabled us to produce enough of it. The European debate that agriculture is more landscaping than food production is giving me shivers when I look at that from a global perspective. We need innovation in food production to fight hunger. We also need to change what goes wrong. In my book, globally, we are eating too many mammals. So especially in the countries like in Europe and in the United States, where the per capita consumption of mammals is far too big, we need to reduce that. We need to fight food waste wherever we can. But even if we do that, we have an increasing demand for food, and we need to do everything we can to satisfy that.
Okay, you also mentioned, Andre, young generations. But as we have very few minutes left, I would also like to talk a little bit about future generations, what future generations can do, but also the citizens. What would you say to young generations to tackle this issue?
I think we should learn from from the future generations, Carol, instead of trying to teach them. I believe that they have captured the essence of the sustainability concept. The millennials, the kids that are now with 20 years old, 25 years old, less than 30 years old, they do have it clear in their minds. So I think it's the other way around. We should actually be observing how they behave. These are that's the generation that is inheriting, funds from their parents, and they will be deciding upon investments in the coming years. They are already deciding upon consumption as we speak now. So we need to observe where are they going in their investment decisions, where are they going in their consumption decisions, so that we companies, we NGOs, we governments can adapt ourselves to their demands. They are the ones going in the right direction. We might want to not just learn from them, but eventually support them to go in that direction and not create barriers for them to go in the right direction, which is what old generations are doing today. I like to say, Carola, that we are the way I see it, we are in the middle of a revolution. And in a revolution, you have people that think one way and people that think another way. So we are mixed up today. We have countries, companies, families that do think on a more conservative way, conservative in a way that, the maintenance of the old proceedings, the old paradigm. There are still people living that old paradigm and that do believe that old paradigm of continuous expansion. At the same time, we are coexisting with people now and scientists and politicians that do know already that we are in trouble. So we have people that are happy and supportive of the old style, and we have people that are concerned and advocating for a new style. But we are living in the same world at the same time. And the kids, the millennium kids, they are the ones going ahead, and they are the ones that will be driving the future. And they are the ones that we should be observing and learning from them. I'm not trying to teach, because my generation at least didn't really deliver interesting results to the future generations, unfortunately.
My build would be, and that's also a conversation I have with my kids, sometimes with more, sometimes with less success, is if you want to be a revolutionary and if you want to be the change you want to see, study biochemistry. Do something in sciences and advance science to a point that we can solve those problems. One thing I like about Fridays for Future is that they have rooted a lot of what they are saying in the scientific findings about climate change. That also means when scientific data points in direction that are inconvenient, that you then also need to basically live with that. For business, a lot is inconvenient about the science behind climate change. But for some who look at agriculture, the understanding that without intensification, we will not be able to protect biodiversity is one of those inconvenient truths that needs to be adopted as well.
Excellent. So we are getting closer to the end of our session. We had 5,000 participants, more than 600 comments, and more than 500 likes. So very lively discussion. So as a takeaway, Matthias, Andre, what would you like to highlight before we close the conversation today?
A year ago, I met you, Andre, for the first time when we were able to physically still meet in Brazil, and I was really inspired by the coalition you built in Brazil with cuts across NGOs and business. And I believe the most important thing, and that's also a message to the Europeans who try to do a lot of finger pointing in the direction of Brazil, is stop the finger pointing, talk to each other, and start solving the problem. I think we have a huge opportunity with the EU-Mercosur trade deal to create a win-win that strengthens biodiversity, that really protects the forests, and at the same time strengthens the livelihood of so many farmers who every day have to kind of work really hard to produce the food that we all enjoy almost as a given. Yeah. So for me, do not point with a finger on somebody because 3 fingers point back to you, and start with uncommon collaboration and alliances rather than the typical kind of very polarized debate. And I think the Europeans have to make the first steps in also understanding that Brazilian agriculture is a very different story than what's often perceived. It's a story of innovation, and it's in my book the reason why we were able to be so successful in reducing food insecurity for a global population.
No, I couldn't agree more, Matthias. I think my takeaway goes in that direction. I think we are, and you've quoted a good example. I mean, the coalition, the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forest, and Agriculture, which is basically a network of people and companies that wants to talk to each other. So we have agribusiness companies, we have banks, we have NGOs, we have scientists, we have lawyers, and we are all talking and trying to come up with a solution to balance deforestation and production. So we understand that the coalition that in the future, hopefully sooner than later, we'll have no more deforestation and we'll increase our production. But how do we do that? I mean, in a polarized world, I think the ingredient today, and that's what is the biggest asset of the coalition, is dialogue. It's capacity to listen to the other and to learn together. You know, everybody has a position. Everybody has a different perspective of the problem of deforestation, for example. So if you talk to a farmer, they will have a perspective. If you talk to a bank, there's a different perspective. An NGO, a third one. A scientist, a fourth one. But all of them, at some extent, they are right and wrong. The only way to sort of really match the visions and come up with a solution is dialoguing, is having the arguments that you can use to show the consequences of us not dialoguing, us not talking to each other, us not learning with each other what should be done. So I think the solution is, of course, Matthias and Carola, science, technology is all behind it. Science is fundamental. Science is pointing in the direction of the risks that we are incurring, but science is also generating the technology which will bail us out in the future. So we need to have science, we need to have dialogue, and we need to have a lot of openness from countries, from the markets, to allow for the changes we need to in the future. And I just wanted to finalize, Matthias, agreeing with you totally when you talk about finger pointing. I think finger pointing and criticizing and eventually boycotting a country or boycotting a sector is part of the solution. It's basically, actually, it's the beginning of the solution, but the solution itself is co-investment. So it's finding together what is the technology of the future, finding together what's the new process that would allow for less deforestation and less harm for nature and people. And that's the only way to do that is to work together. So dialogue, that's my takeaway. The need for dialogue is my takeaway of this moment together with you today. And once again, Carol, Matthias, thank you very much, and congratulations for Bayer to organizing this intellectual moment that we had today. And hopefully the audience have learned a little bit and engaged a little more in the challenges of the future. So thank you very much, Bayer, and for inviting me here today.
Muito obrigado, Andre.
Muito obrigada. So
Dankeschön.
Thanks, Andre and Matthias. Thanks so much for your insightful conversation, for your attitude, for the dialogue. Keep inspiring everyone, and thanks for the conversation. You're always invited, Andre, as well, to these talks. And with that, thank you everyone for joining. We had tons of people joining today. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Carlotta.
Thank you, Carlotta.